News, there's been a spike in the number of child sexual abuse cases reported in some of our schools.
Well, advocacy group Women and Men Against Child Abuse says the recent abuse cases show there are systemic flaws that allow for certain behaviours to continue within the school system. Well,
to discuss this, we're joined in the studio by Luke Lamprecht, the group's Child Protection and Development Specialist. Mr. Lamprecht, good morning and thank you very much for your time. I mean, there are a couple of examples that we've been covering recently involving Bryanston High School and Valhalla Primaries. I mean, I don't know if there's any others that we might have missed.
Parktown
Boys recently.
Amazizi High School,
yeah. How serious is the situation of child abuse in our schools, in your view?
Look, it's starting to look like it's at sort of epidemic proportions. You know, one of the things that we are finding, what we have always found, is that people choose careers that give them access to children. So we call them career offenders. So people who want to abuse children will find jobs that give them access to children. And the systems are clearly not in place to protect children at schools, first of all. And when things come to light at schools, it seems that the processes that are followed are sort of almost like fatally flawed.
So what are those problems? What are the flaws in reporting that in some cases seem to have allowed the suspected offenders to go free?
So I think if we look at Abit Guma, for example, it seems that the school initially didn't report it and they attempted to deal with it internally. They had interviews with the children. That then went through the system. There was allegations that the forensic social work abused the children, and then it ended up at a position where it was so muddled when it got to court that the judge couldn't make a finding. If you look at the Valhalla case, it's alleged that the vice principal was told and he warned the person, and this person then went and said, well, I'll try and do better, I'll try and behave myself. If you look at other cases in the more prestigious schools, they tend to get, and there's about 3 of these, they tend to get private lawyers in to manage it, and there seems to be a lot of reputational protection going on in those cases.
But what does the law allow, from what we know, in such cases?
Okay, so the law is actually extremely clear. So Section 54 of the Sexual Offences Act says any person who knows a child has been abused must report it to the police immediately. Now, the argument by the schools is, how do they know it's truth? The point is, you are not making an accusation against somebody. You are merely, under Section 54, requesting an investigation by the state into those circumstances.
And most of these cases, the schools have not done that, from what I've heard.
That's correct. And what they seem to have done is they've involved the SGB, they've hired private attorneys, they've involved their school management teams. Even the GDE in some instances weren't informed because these people are school governing body posts, so they're not employed by the department. And we have found that many of the accused, well, certainly in 2 of the cases I know about, these educators or coaches weren't even SACE registered, so the South African Council of Educators can't even step in.
So let's look at the different layers, levels of reporting and what is going wrong on each level they look. I mean, let's start with when a child goes to somebody and says, this is what's happening, let's assume it's the parent. On that level, and you would imagine that as soon as the parent hears, as parents we would feel, there's a lot of emotion that comes through. Could that also be impeding or getting in the way of how these cases are handled? And then, of course, we go to the education department and then go on to police and all of that.
There's absolutely no doubt. If you think that schools are in locus parentis, you're paying for people to look after your child, and then it comes at these people who are entrusted with your children, those people are now accused of abuse. And in addition, very often, the parents have been groomed by the abusers. So the parents like these people because they have done special things for their children.
And made to trust them with their children, yes.
Made to trust them. They've given them extra lessons. They've given them extra coaching. They say they're going to be the next sort of sport legend. So the parents really like these people because you have to be able to groom the parent to get access to the child as well. So once that shock comes, I mean, it's a trauma to the parent to say, how did I not know this was happening? And then they do go into shock, and it's very difficult to behave rationally when you're in shock.
Now, if, as you say, there's multiple systemic flaws in the reporting of child abuse at schools, what can, if there's anything at all, the Gauteng Department of Education, for example, can do, or the Basic Education Department can do?
So I think the first thing is they need to make it very clear to all of their staff, whether they are GDE, SGB or IEB appointments, that when a case is reported, your job is to report it to the police for investigation. The fact that you need to hold a parallel process is really important because there's a parallel labour process, so there's a process related to that person's employment, and that depends on whether they're employed by the department or by the school governing body, or it's an independent school, and those processes need to be followed separately. But what needs to be understood is that that needs to run parallel to the criminal system, and the criminal system takes precedence because it's the state discharging its duty to protect children, and the labour process is governed by a circular from last year that says that case needs to go immediately to arbitration so that we prevent these victims having to testify in multiple processes multiple times, which results in secondary victimisation by the system of those victims, which is a huge disincentive to disclose.
And you speak of, them going to police and making their case then. I mean, let's talk about faith in the police and how they've been dealing with the case. Are they getting any better at this, or are the bigger flaws still lying there as well in that process?
So the sort of the integral flaw in the police system is that you've got a local police station where the case has to be laid, so you can get what's called a CAS number, or Criminal Administration System number. Once it's in the system, it goes to the Family, Child and Sexual Offences Unit, which is a cluster police group who are specialist detectives who investigate these kinds of cases. So it's family cases, children's cases, and sexual offences cases. Those detectives are actually really good. What tends to be a struggle, though, for example, in the schools when they go back to get statements, because the school is in some way seen as complicit, there's almost this disincentive for people in the school to make statements because they've got this role as being an employee as well. And when we look at it, in some of the cases, we look at them and say, how could you not have known something was happening based on basic knowledge of grooming?
Mm-hmm. Serious situation. You have to change the behavior, and they have to report to the police, because you get two things. The people who are perpetrators of these kind of things know that they are being investigated, and secondly, the school can relax and focus on education. Let the law enforcement agency do its job.
And help the survivors of these
help
cases.
The survivors.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that out of the stories that never made it, or those offenders who walked free, that we've learned from those experiences, and that something comes out of that. Thank you very much, Luke Lamprecht. He is Women and Men Against Child Abuse's Child Protection and Development Specialist, joining us this morning.